Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Kelly Atkinson, Chair of CMC's Board of Trustees, and also the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director and Columbus Office Administrator at AmLaw 100 law firm Barnes & Thornburg. All right, today's forum is sponsored by the Columbus Partnership and is presented with support from the Columbus Dispatch, in more ways than one, you will find out. Today's live stream is presented by the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation in partnership with, wait for it, the Columbus Dispatch. So let's thank all of those supporting today's forum. And to introduce today's speakers, please welcome Alex Fisher, President and CEO of the Columbus Partnership. Alex, the podium is yours.
Thank you, and a big congratulations to the organizers, because I think, candidly, that this may be one of the best group of individuals that I've ever come to the CMC to hear speak. So we're all anxious to hear and learn from this distinguished group of individuals. Their knowledge across what's happened in the world of media over the years leading up to the rapid change in the last decade will be fascinating. But candidly, their views in stories and maybe a few things that we've never heard about the deals and history and the goings-on around Columbus and politics will be fascinating as well. I hope all of you all will welcome this distinguished panel. It includes Mike Curtin, the former editor and former associate publisher of the Columbus Dispatch, and now umpire for strikes and just calling it like he sees it, which is what he did when he was at the Dispatch. Luke Feck, former editor of the Columbus Dispatch and American Electric Power executive later in his career. Ben Marrison, former editor of the Dispatch and current chief of staff for the Ohio Attorney General. And Alan Miller, the current executive editor of the Dispatch and regional editor for Gannett. And to moderate and or just simply to hang on to the stories is another Columbus Dispatch alumnus. She was a state editor, editorial writer, and reporter, and since 2009, she's been the executive producer and host of WOSU Public Media's All Sides with Ann Fisher. She's also covered the State House for 9 years with the Toledo Blade. So for today's conversation, please welcome Ann Fisher.
Thank you very much. Just a little bit of preview. 3 of these guys up here are former bosses of mine. The guy on the my far left, your right, hired me, and the one next to him promoted me, and he was always there, and I've known him since I was a State House reporter, so that's how far we go back. And Luke Feck and I cleared the air today we've met briefly before, but otherwise, I'm all ears. Thank you, Alex, for that introduction. Thanks to everybody for joining us today. I've heard from a lot of people in recent weeks regarding this event, some to complain about that picture in the paper. A common request is that we talk about the future of journalism, and of course that's part of it. But and I get that, but we've been doing that. That's all we talk about is the future of journalism. I call it the unraveling rope bridge across the chasm of the future. But as Machiavelli said, whoever wishes to foresee the future must consult the past, for human events ever resemble those of preceding times. This arises from the fact, and this is what's important, that they are produced by men who ever have been and ever shall be animated by the same passions, and thus they necessarily have the same results. And I love that quote in this case because every one of the men on this panel has been animated by the same larger passion, the same calling, and that being journalism. So their experiences from the past, their trajectories through the world of journalism dating back to the 1970s, crucial periods of industry contraction before the one we were experiencing now, even change and prosperity. The days of prosperity certainly aren't that long ago. They all matter. To that end, I begin with a question to the panel, kind of at large. And by the way, I'll also go public with this. I told them to talk to each other. I don't, the Q&A format doesn't appeal to me. I hope you agree, and will encourage them in that way. So. Let's start with Luke Feck. What era, and then just move on from there, whoever wants to jump in. What era in the history of journalism played the backdrop to your tenure as editor of the Dispatch?
Okay, when I came to Columbus in 1980, John F. Wolfe was very interested in improving the Dispatch. And I was very interested at that time in leaving the Cincinnati Enquirer. So we moved up here, a little traumatic for my family, but my wife lived in the same zip code all her life until we moved here. But we moved up and began work, and John was very generous in what he allowed me to do in those years. We added like 13 staffers the first year I was here. We sectionalized the paper. We did a lot of things that were that hadn't been done previously. Let's put it that way. And I appreciated that. And we had an opportunity to go become a morning paper. The last time I spoke at the Metropolitan Club was December of 1984, and we were talking about the demise, or not the demise, the expiration of the joint operating agreement with the Citizen Journal. So we became a morning paper, and that lasted for me until October of '89.
Luke set the path that the rest of us had the benefit of following. The paper that he came into in 1980 was a disorganized hodgepodge. There were some very, very talented journalists at the Dispatch who inspired a number of us. I joined the paper in '73, and the likes of Dave Lohr and Mary McGarry and Danny Flavin. I mean, there were a lot of good people doing good journalism, but the paper itself was a jumbled mess. It was not sectionalized. You didn't know where you'd find a given story, except you knew you'd find sports in the sports section. That was about all that you could predict day to day. And Luke came, and he modernized the paper in many, many ways. As I said, he sectionalized it. He brought photographic and artistic talent to the paper, and that photographic talent and artistic talent just really took off in the years and decades after that. The paper became very well known for its appearance and its artwork, its photography. And Luke was able to sort of bring glasnost and perestroika to the paper in many ways. Incrementally, nothing was revolutionary. Those of you, and there are many in the audience, starting with Bill Wolfe over there, who knew the Wolfe family very well, of course, and it wasn't going to be overnight, but Luke really set the path that allowed John F. set the path that allowed Luke to do it, and the paper's been on a positive trajectory ever since.
So I came to the Dispatch in '99. I would not have come in '94 or '93. It was the work of the two gentlemen on my right that created the environment that I was willing to leave the plain dealer, which is where I thought I would finish my career. But what Luke did was kind of pour the footer. And Mike built the foundation, which allowed me and then Alan to kind of build the house. And I am a great beneficiary of the work these guys did. When I got to the paper, it felt primed to really take off. And I remember somebody did a story about this young guy arriving at the Dispatch when I had more hair and less gray. And Mike said, we're both pitchers. Mike is a finesse pitcher, and I throw heat. And so I was My wife will tell you I'm always in a hurry. So we were able to build and recruit really good people. We changed who we went after. Instead of trying to hire people regionally, we would target, kind of like a professional sports team, we need a left tackle. Who's the best left tackle? In our case, we needed a great hockey writer. Who's out there? Mike A-Race. We went to Hartford to get him. So each of us, whatever success I've had at the Dispatch, as limited as it was, I couldn't have done it without the work Luke first did and then Mike did, and the permission that John F. and the Wolfs gave us. I mean, they were spending money to let us hire people that we hadn't spent that kind of money on before, and I think it showed in the product.
And then the economy collapsed, so we made Alan editor.
Thanks, guys. Ben and I have often talked about how we wished, that we could have experienced editorship when the paper was printing money, like when you guys were the editors. But I like how Ben has described it in some past discussions on this topic, that, Luke built the car, Mike put gas in the tank, and Ben put his foot to the floor. And that's how we took off and became the best newspaper in Ohio, at least the last 8 years. And there might have been one intervening year where someone else got it, but it's been a decade or so that the Dispatch has been named best newspaper by the Associated Press. And the credit, as Ben said, goes to the staff, which for me has been a great blessing. We are blessed with so many talented journalists who work now harder than ever to, there are 75 of us in the newsroom who are now doing the work that 250 did a decade ago. And so it's never been more challenging, I would say, than right now.
When I was editor, became editor in late '95, and for the several years after that, we had 250 FTEs in our newsroom: reporters, photographers, artists, clerical people. The whole schmear was 250 people. Alan just told you it's 75 or 4 or 3 today. So I can't imagine the pressures that are on Alan and his staff every day. I thought we, worked long and hard hours with 250 people, back in the mid to late 90s, and to do it with 75 is stunning. Just one note about the tailwinds that we had. I like to think that the 4 of us did a lot of good work, but you need forces that are beneficial to you. And many of you know this story, but when I give you a couple numbers, it just is dramatic how strong those tailwinds for us were. Columbus and Central Ohio has been the only city and county and region growing in Ohio for the last half century plus. Think about this, that Cleveland reached its peak population in 1950. And in every census since 1950, for the last 70 years, they've been losing population. Same is true with Cincinnati and Canton and Youngstown. For Akron and Dayton, they've reached their peak populations in 1960. So when I became editor in 95, Columbus was a place people wanted to be, regardless of what their profession was. If you were going to be in Ohio, you were going to be coming to a dynamic market with dynamic employers and dynamic leadership, whether you want to talk about Ohio State or all the other tremendous assets and economic engines we have in this town. So when I recruited a Ben Marrison, when I recruited an Ann Fisher, when I recruited any number of people to come to the paper, I knew this was a market they wanted to be in, and they wanted their families to be in. It was only a question of persuading them that the paper was going to continue to be on an upward trajectory, and that they were going to have the wingspan and the freedom to do what good journalists want to do. So when you look at those census numbers, and we just got the 2020 census, and so I've been looking at those because that's what old retired newspaper people do. We look at census numbers all the time.
He did it before he retired.
Yeah, it is stunning. That 1950 population when I was born in 1951 in Columbus was 375,000. population of Columbus. We're closing in on 1 million now. And it's sad that the rest of Ohio is sucking air like it is, but that was a tremendous benefit to us trying to recruit talent to the paper.
It is amazing what Alan is able to do with the way the economy of a newspaper has been affected. I did some measures just for the heck of it the other day, and last Sunday's paper had 3 pages of classified. In the last Sunday in November '89, there were 43 pages of classified advertising. And give or take, classified advertising was about 45% of the total advertising. So you can see what 45 pages or 40 pages of classified advertising is just gone. And it's gone to the internet, it's gone to anywhere but newspapers.
You remember, I think, Ben, when you were in charge, when you were talking about putting some level of display ads on the front page, and everyone was flipping out over that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was blasphemy to me. Mike talked me off the ledge multiple times. You know, he had a favorite expression, "Is that the ditch you want to die in?" Once a week I would get that from Mike, because I was insistent we weren't going to.
You owe me, kid, you owe me.
Yeah, I know. But I remember when the Newsroom was aghast. Readers didn't like it. And, you know, we put a little ad, and then we put a Post-it on there, and then stickers that were impossible to take off without. It's all Craig Foyote's fault for selling those ads. But it was annoying, but we had to be creative and got increasingly desperate to do things that we wouldn't have. Mike talked about the number of people we had. I remember we had total FTEs was 263 was the highest under me, 263, and I was livid that I couldn't convince the CFO to get to 400 like the Plain Dealer had. 400. They had 440 or something like that. But
When Ken Pierce was chief financial officer during my tenure as editor, Ken Pierce retired, and then Jim Gilmore came in as chief financial officer. And when I wanted to add a section or I wanted to add some people to the newsroom, I'd go to Gilmore and say, "Now, if I propose this, John F., you're not going to oppose me, are you, Gilmore?" And he said, "Curtin, we spill more money than that on the way to the bank." And so I hate to burden you with that, Alan, but we used to have so much money we didn't know what to do with it.
Well, they used to have these gatherings for the staff. I mean, I think the first year I was there, like, rented out half of the Columbus Zoo. This another year, rented out Polaris Amphitheater. And then there were those shrimp lunches around Christmas time.
Giant shrimp.
Giant shrimp. Yeah, I mean, we were spoiled. When I first started there, you didn't even have a premium for the health insurance.
my favorite thought of excess at the Dispatch is when I got there was this woman walking around with a coffee cart. And she was filling these, that was her job. She filled coffee pots around the building. And
We drank a lot of coffee. It was a big job.
it's like, who is that? Oh, whatever her name was, she fills coffee. Judy. And then when we had to make some cuts and when Judy was left, it was like we took away health insurance from that coffee.
You know, just for the record, how many former or current Dispatch staffers are in the room? Can you just raise your hands or give people a sense about, yeah. And a lot of them are still current, but it's a big community out there of people that have worked at the Dispatch and have gone on to rep it in other ways. You know, being in the editor's seat, a lot of decisions have to be made every single day. People are asking you, you know, a million questions: how to do this, what to do this, where to cut. You know, to Alan's from Alan's point of view. But I'm wondering about what we didn't see in the paper, and if you could talk a little bit about a story you didn't print, that you had to make a tough decision about, things that you passed on. even when you had a ton of room in the paper in Mike Curtin's era. Yeah, Luke Feck?
I'm having a hearing problem. I didn't hear.
What? Okay, maybe I'm not.
A story that hit the cutting room floor and never made the paper.
There were not a lot of those. There really weren't. People thought there were a hell of a lot more of them than there were. And I worked on the premise that we were a mirror, and we held it up, and you ran what the mirror showed. And I do not remember any interference from above cutting a story that was scheduled to run in a dispatch from 1980 to 89. I don't remember that.
Yeah, and I mean, it may or may not have been from above, the impetus, but it's just kind of the challenge that the editors would, a lot of people assumed that the above was more involved than maybe they were.
When I was editor, it wasn't a matter of a story hitting the cutting room floor and not appearing. It was more of a matter of having reporters look at areas that were pretty sensitive, and there being some nervousness, by John F. and the front office. In 1998, we did our first deep exploration of the big money machine of OSU sports. Barney Wolf on our business desk and some other reporters worked together, but Barney did most of the heavy lifting, and it was a marvelous exploration and assessment of the money machine that OSU sports is. And anytime you're talking about Ohio State or nationwide, if you're doing a deep drilling exercise into those really important institutions in our community, there'd be sensitivities in the front office. And I would have to, explain to John F. that I'm on it. I'm watching every word, every syllable, and it's going to be fine. It's going to be balanced. We're not going to allow a Bob Ruth to go out with a hatchet and, take somebody's ear off. And so there are any number of those. In 1999, I was proud to preside over our first really deep exploration into the color divide in Central Ohio. We did an 8-day series called the Color Chasm that got a lot of attention in the community, as it should have. And it was a very broad-based exploration, into how far we have come and how far we have not come, in terms of race relations and the advancement of black life in Central Ohio. And we had about 8 reporters working full-time on that for many months before we finally got that done.
And I do remember one story that was close, and it does illustrate how far we've come. When Earl Bruce got fired, Dick Fenlon, our sports columnist, wrote a rather scathing column about the athletic department administration. And our deadline was 10:30, and at 10:20, I read it to John F. over the phone, and he was not happy at all. And he said, do you think we should run it? And I said, well, we buy his opinion when we agree with it. I don't know why we shouldn't buy his opinion when we don't. And after a long, long, long pause, we ran a story.
There were 2 stories that come to mind that I didn't think we would get in. And, you hire really talented people, you challenge them to go to places we've never gone before, and then they come back with something that causes you great consternation, but it's good journalism. One was whether or not Les Wexner was paying his fair share of property taxes. I thought that might be a ditch I was going to die in. And Mike was a great mentor to all of us. I needed more mentoring than others, but he would tell me, you just can't surprise the publisher. You just kind of have to. And so I had to, with this one, keep assuring him. And finally, he wanted to see the story. That's fine. You're going to see it when it's printed. You might as well see it before it is. And he asked really intelligent questions that a good journalist would ask. And he was Mike used to talk about how he had good journalism 101 bones in him, and he did. You could not be there and the whole family was really into it. But he would ask really good questions, difficult ones but fair, and we answered them, and that ran. And the other one was on the mortgages and the housing collapse, and Dominion Homes was at the center of it. This was at a time when our revenues weren't what they used to be when they were spilling money on the way to the bank. Sorry. That was intentional. But, it was, I wasn't sure what he was going to think of it.
And they were threatening to pull their advertising.
And they did after, yeah.
Yeah.
But we had, I think Alan shepherded that project as he was overseeing that team. But it ran, and we lost advertisers, but hopefully we gained credibility in the community because we're, trying to protect the interest of those who live here.
The angriest I ever saw John F., speaking of don't surprise the publisher, the angriest I ever saw him was, Luke, you'd moved on. I wasn't yet editor. I was a managing editor. Bob Smith was editor. Bob is gone. Sorry for this story, Bob, but, it's just the raw truth. Bob Hunter had written a column about Art Modell moving the Browns to Baltimore. Okay, and of course, that move surprised everybody in Ohio. The moving vans pulled up at midnight, they moved the Browns to Baltimore, and all of Ohio was enraged. John F. was a huge Browns fan, grew up as a Browns fan. He could recite the starting lineup of each Browns team throughout the 1960s. He knew his Browns, he loved his Browns. He was really upset when Art Modell moved the team, but he was more upset when he read Bob Hunter's column a couple days later. And Bob Hunter just tore the skin off of Art Modell, just boiled him in oil and wrote things like, Art Modell has led a cesspool of a life. That was one of the lines from the column. And I'm in the office, and Bob's in the office, and the front door, the front office, there's 3 steps down to the newsroom. The front door slams open. John F. was usually step pretty lightly, but he's boom, 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 marching down into the newsroom. Steam's coming out of his ears. I'm thinking, oh, shit. He marches into Bob's office. We call him Smitty, and plops down the column. And he goes, who approved this? And Smitty doesn't know what to say. John F. had not seen the column. And John F. is staring at Bob Smith, and he's saying, do you know how much money Art Modell has given to Rainbow Babies Hospital in children? Do you know how much money Art Modell has given to the Cleveland Symphony Orchestra? Do you know? And he just rattled off Art Modell's contributions to Cleveland over the decades and what the Art Modell family has meant to Cleveland in so many respects. And he goes, look, I'm as upset as anybody that the Browns are gone, but GD, we don't do that and tear somebody down ad hominem, personal, for a business decision like that. And Smitty had seen the column ahead of time. John F. had not. Smitty had not forwarded that column to, and I thought, you know what, when I become editor, if I become editor, I'm not going to make that mistake. Oh, then I took Bob Hunter to the church basement. So, some of you remember the church basement, Trinity Episcopal at the corner there, and I said, Bob, if you write a column like that again, show it to me because I think I can save your butt on this one, but I can't save your butt on the next one.
I think I did a column that I got a similar talking to from Ben on project labor agreements, and you said, don't ever do that again. You just came up behind me and, right in my ear. I didn't get the church basement. I didn't get any food out of it.
I didn't have Mike's expense account.
Mike, when you started down the path of when John was most angry, I thought you were going to talk about a story that I wrote. It was when Kathy Kandinsky and I followed a public official who we had heard was only working half a day at best and spending other parts of the day in drinking establishments. And so we'd followed and done our homework and had a really good story, and it made the paper. I'll give you the punchline right now. It was not one of those stories that I think Ann was looking for that didn't make the paper, but we had a lot of those journalism 101 questions thrown our way, and finally we were asked to get colleagues of this official to say that this person was committing malfeasance or misfeasance, and the people who worked with him actually did say those things, and so the story appeared in the paper. But it was that was a really challenging time.
You know, I mean, we can talk around it all day long, but I am interested in your memories of John F. Wolfe. We all have them. I particularly, because I was. Not because I was a columnist. He talking to me when I was a columnist, but I was on the editorial board when I was an editorial writer. It was a really rare opportunity to see him in action and his thoughtfulness. And I remember the $1.25 million worth of cheese that the federal government was offering the state, and John was adamantly opposed to taking it because he didn't want to start an entitlement that we would come to expect. And I finally said, but John, we argued for days about this. I said, what about the children? And he said, one of those long John F. Wolfe pauses, said, oh, just write it. Once you brought up the children, he had a heart of gold in his own way, and I would love to hear your memories of John F. Wolfe, and the particular one that strikes you.
Want to go first?
I'm getting feedback in
I apologize.
my hearing aids aren't.
Your memories of John F., a particular memory that resonates with you.
Well, he was very quiet, and he was really smart, and he knew a lot of stuff about a lot of different things, and I think that probably is my greatest memory of him, is his almost encyclopedic knowledge of things. I can remember an issue that had to do with farming, and he started rattling off all this stuff about farming, and I mean, I knew they owned farms and all that, but I mean, it was right down to the furrows that we were talking, and just his knowledge, I think.
Well, when I think of John F., I think of an absolute gentleman. People would come in to the editorial board who were furious at us for something we had published. The CEO of Scott's, Jim Hagedorn, we had written an investigation of vermiculite and what it was doing to workers there. And if you know Jim Hagedorn, he is beautifully unvarnished.
He drops the F-bomb a lot.
Yeah, but so he came in and he was on fire, and he was spitting nails, and he went off, and John F. didn't swear a lot, but Jim did at that time. Don't know if he does now. And John treated him so professionally, so politely, and I just kept waiting for somebody for him to respond in kind, because I would have. The only time I ever saw him respond in kind, and it wasn't precisely that, was there was a public official who came in, and they had been it was with the School Facilities Commission, and they had done a horrible job, and it's a very complicated story, but when the person who ran it came in to explain the issues, was less than truthful. And to Luke's point, John F. knew every line we had published, and he went through it with him, all the errors this guy did and all the things we found and how taxpayers were getting ripped off, and he just very gradually raised his volume, which he didn't do a lot. And at the end of it, I was just thinking, yeah, it was like Rocky Balboa. He was going. And I thought, yes, he finally let it all out. But he was an absolute gentleman, even in that case. he gave the gentleman an opportunity to come clean, and he did not.
Well, I worked in John's office, in his building for 30-some years, but I didn't interact with him as frequently as any of the others here. But the day that he had to tell us that he was selling the paper, that was a moment that all of what you just heard came through so sincerely, that he was so pained by the thought of selling this part of his family, and I think he felt that he was letting us all down, and it was his humanity that really came through.
One thing, there was not an editorial board at the Dispatch until 1983. That sounds like a simple thing, but there was no gathering of the clan to discuss issues, get input from other people, have the reporter who was covering what you might be talking about. None of that went on prior to 83.
We're going to move to questions from our live stream and in-person audiences and audience in just a few minutes. If you have a question, please make your way to the microphone now. It's right over there to my left. Before we take audience questions, though, I have one final question. And yeah, I've been in 3 different newsrooms over my career besides WOSU's, and something always happened that just news happened. And often we were actually in the room watching it happen on television. And, even in the olden days, we had TVs in the newsroom. And I'm wondering what your experience was as an editor when there was a crisis, when something big happened, and you had to tear down the front page practically on the spot, and that feeling. Mike Curtin, or Luke Feck, yeah.
The one for me was the Beverly Hills fire in the late 70s, 78, I think. My dad had died on Friday, and Saturday Beverly Hills burned down, and our family was in a mourning state. And here is the Supper Club of the Midwest on fire, and people dying and people being stacked up. And we made over the paper 12 times that night from 10:30 to 2:30 a.m. It just all-encompassing.
I was only editor for 4 years before I was pulled into the front office, so I don't remember anything nearly as dramatic as that. I do recall as public affairs editor for a long time before that, writing the main political story for the next morning, a governor's election, a mayor's election, for 10 years plus. I was writing the page 1 story from the previous night's election, and John loved politics. This is a little humorous story about John and the art of feeding and carrying the publisher. We had great deadlines back then. We could write up until about midnight, and we could even make over the paper until 1 or 1:30. And so it's 11:30 at night, it's 11:45. I'm writing the main bar, on Voinovich beating Celebrezzi in the 1990 governor's race. But it's, you're taking advantage of every minute you have until you actually have to turn your copy over to the copy desk. So the copy chief is saying, "Curtin, where's your copy? Curtin, where's your copy?" Well, the reason I can't go as quickly as I'd like to is because the publisher is sitting next to me and he wants to talk about the election. And I was trying to master the fine art of saying, "John, will you get out of here?" So I can finish my story. So, John loved politics so much. Sometimes on deadline, I have to balance writing for our 270,000 readers at the time, 410,000 on Sundays, and letting John know that he needed to go back to the front office for a while.
Get back in your spot.
The Bush-Gore election, Alan's lucky. His deadlines are early. He doesn't have to worry about this now. That's the one blessing he has in this current environment. But it was, who's winning? And we were sitting there watching Florida, waiting on Florida, waiting on Florida. And so we had it written both ways. And finally, they called Florida. So if we had it earlier, too close to call, and then that was the first edition, and then Bush won. So we updated it, sent the pages, and Kirk Arnott, who was our assistant managing editor for nights and was watching the wires, and he said, something weird, they're saying something weird about Florida. The pages are gone. And I said, ask Florida, Well, we all know what happened, right? That morning, I think I got home at 3 a.m., about 6:30, my wife wakes me up and said, Channel 4 is on the phone. They want to talk to you about your decision to change it from Bush 1, from Bush 1 to Too Close to Call, which was what happened. It was the opposite, and I had no idea. I was, sleeping for 3 hours that everything had flipped. So I could have been dishonest and said, yeah, we knew it was Too Close to Call and we flipped it, but that was one where I was worried when I went in the office how the publishers were going to react. I just didn't know. And he came in and he sat down and said, we talked about what happened. He said, I probably would have done the same thing. I thought, thank God. He would not have, by the way. He would have kept it Too Close to Call. He is such a conservative person. You may have some, though, Alan, before they moved your deadlines to so early.
No, I wasn't editor at the time you were, but my thought went to 9/11, and that was a marathon of coverage for days and weeks. Yes, and it was not a local story in the sense that none of the attacks happened here, but it was a local story in so many ways because of how it affected everybody. And back then well, I'll never forget, we all gathered in the newsroom and we had this brainstorming session about, and you have to experience this to really fully understand and appreciate it. But in a time like that, a newsroom is more alive and full of energy and power than you'd ever see. I mean, I don't want to say that we're as brave as firefighters, but when other people are running away from disaster, we run toward it. And so we sent people to New York City, and we sent them to Shanksville, and we sent them, Jack Torrey sprinted probably faster than he's ever run from our office in Washington to the Pentagon. And we just, we spent days and days doing exactly that same thing over and over to make sure that people in Columbus knew exactly what was going on in all these parts of the world and how it was affecting us. And that night, we worked right up to deadline and drove to the plant to see the papers coming off the press because it was such a huge, important news event for us to cover.
Yeah, but that day, I remember what Alan's describing. I can still see it. We had the entire newsroom surrounding the 4th floor. And I see Mike come out of the front office. And I didn't know what Mike was going to say. He was a good newsman. And he came out and I thought he wanted to be a part of it. He listened to it. He was happy with where we were going. So I just remember Mike walking out. And I remember at about 10:30 that night looking at a photo. It was in Mary Lynn's office. It was me, Alan, and Mary Lynn. I'm looking at this photo, and it's this piece of iron. And because you're so busy, there's so many photos, I said, what is that? And they said, that's what's left of the tower, the one tower. And I remember my heart just hitting the floor. And then as we left that night, I remember being in the parking lot. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. We walked out, and I told them, I said, I'm going to the plant. And they all said, us too. We went out and watched them come off because we just had to feel it that night to make sure it felt right. But you're talking about watching TV and seeing that happen, Ann. And
Yeah, I was at my desk. I was an editor, and I'm like, what is everybody over there gawking at the TV for? Let's get them back to work. And I went over there and saw the second plane. So it is Columbus Metropolitan Club's longstanding tradition to take audience questions. Lainey Cuthbert of CMC is curating questions from the live stream audience. And for our in-house audience, please join Lainey at the microphone. Hit it, Lainey.
All righty. I have 4 questions that are so similar, I'm just going to lump them together. So from Jaron Terry, Kathy Fox, Mindy Wright, and Eric Brown. What have been the past roles of women and people of color at the Dispatch? And what year will CMC be able to host a forum with a woman or a person of color as a former editor?
Well, it's great. It's a great question. I can remember, I mentioned Mary McGarry before, as a young reporter at the paper. I marveled at how smart and talented and well-sourced she was, as talented a journalist as existed at the paper. And as the years rolled by, I thought many times if Mary weren't a woman, she would have been editor a long time ago, or God knows what, above editor. That's how talented she was. So it's moved very slowly, obviously, in the industry and at the Dispatch. But, efforts have been made, especially under Alan recently. But, it's been a long slog.
Yeah, we have not done as well as we could or should have as a newsroom, as a news organization, to diversify our staff. And we have made a very intentional commitment to rectifying that. And we're working on it. We've made a number of incredibly great hires in the past year or two that has helped with the diversity, not only of our staff, but also of our coverage, which is also very intentional. We are, as many of you know, we have developed something we call the mobile newsroom that took up residence in the Northland area for the past month and a half, with the goal of shining a spotlight on the community of Northland, which is incredibly diverse, home to many immigrants, people of color, and all races, basically. And so this has gone on really, it's been, Ryan Smith, who's here today, is leading that effort, and he and the team, Michael Walker and Holly Zachariah, were the first 2 reporters to be involved with this. Our next stop will be Driving Park, where Erica Thompson and Mark Ferenchek will be the lead reporters in residence at and I'm thankful to the Columbus Metropolitan Library, which has allowed us to use their facilities as kind of a home base in these mobile efforts. But we hired Yilin Chang to focus on immigration and refugees. Danae King also does that. We are working diligently to be more diverse, and I hope that is showing through. Specifically to the question, when will you see a woman or a person of color up here on this stage? I hope it's very soon. My replacement hasn't been named yet, but I think you all probably know I'm retiring at the end of the year. So someday soon, we're going to know who my replacement is, and then we'll know. And I hope that it isn't a former editor who's sitting up here. I hope that person, whoever is chosen, is up here long before it's time for that person to leave or retire.
I'm Deborah Price, and I'm probably dating myself with this question, but there was a John F. Wolfe, because before him there was a John W. Wolfe. And we've heard a lot about John F. today, and I just wonder if there's any comment on the other John before him's contributions to the paper, the community, any contrast you care to share, and what his legacy may have been. Thank you.
Luke was the only editor who dealt with both John Walton and John Frederick, because John Walton died 2 years before I became editor. So Luke, you want to kick that one off?
Well, John W. and I got along pretty good. I can remember an instance or two when he said he resented something that I had done, and that's not a good sign. That's the bad sign. And after I was resigned from the Dispatch, J.W. summarized it this way: he forgot who he worked for.
Deborah, John Walton made great contributions to the community in many ways. He didn't make great contributions to the paper. In fact, his presence kept me from applying for a number of promotions when I was encouraged to apply. In 1991, Betty DeBloom dies, Carl DeBloom's wife. Carl was Luke's predecessor as editor. I'm going through the receiving line at Chettinger's North in Worthington to extend my condolences to Carl. And as soon as I briefly do that, Carl's next words out of his mouth were, "Mike, why aren't you applying for those promotions?" The reason was I didn't want to have to deal with John Walton, because I'd seen what happened to Luke, and I thought I'd have a shot at dealing with John Frederick, but I didn't want to deal with John Walton, and because power was very important to John Walton, and it was more important than the quality of the paper, quite frankly. The reason I decided to apply for promotions was I saw that John Walton was, getting pretty sick and wasn't going to be around for long, and I thought I'll roll the dice with John Frederick. I wouldn't have rolled the dice with John Walton. That's just the raw truth of it. His contributions were very unspoken and understated. He never took much, didn't want much credit for a lot of that he did in the community, and that's an old tradition among the generations of Wolfs. But John Walton would not have come to Luke and say, "Luke, temper me." John Frederick, when he promoted me several times, said, "Mike, remember, I need to be tempered." And I remembered that, and sometimes I've reminded him of it.
That's a great point that Mike made. He did a lot for the community, more than many will ever know, just like Art Modell, but he did not do much for the paper.
Thanks for that question.
Good afternoon, John Palmer with the Ohio Hospital Association from Pickerington, Ohio. But I was curious to hear your insights.
Your mask.
Oh, sorry.
Just so that people can
Yeah,
understand.
John Palmer with the Ohio Hospital Association. And I was curious, with all the royalty on the stage, when it comes to journalism, schools and programs, any advice you have for future journalists coming up through on their career and things that you might want to advise them on as they embark on a career in journalism? And thank you for all your service and stewardship at the Dispatch. Thank you.
Alan Miller's embarking or continuing and broadening his career in journalism education.
Yes. As I end my career at the Dispatch, I'll be teaching full-time at Denison University, teaching journalism. Counterintuitively, Denison created a journalism major. The faculty approved that in May. I say counterintuitively because, and I could hear this in your question, is, what's the future for people who study journalism now? And I'll tell you that journalism is more important now than it's ever been. Whether everyone in society will agree with this or not, the fact is, facts matter, and we don't have enough people gathering them in ethically sound ways and presenting them to the society in a way that will help all of us make good decisions about who we vote for and how we live our lives. And incredibly, despite all of the buffeting that this industry has taken, there are young people out there who are on fire for good journalism, and we can all be thankful for that because we need them. And I'm really grateful to be part of that. If your question is, which are the best schools, Ohio is blessed with a number of good programs. Ohio University, Kent State, Miami, BG, they're all good programs. Ohio State's program has provided us with a number of really talented journalists and interns and recent hires. So, and of course, Denison is on the rise with a new program. So we are blessed with a lot of programs in this state, and there are many beyond. What they all need is support. And so does our industry. So I want to thank all of you who are subscribers, and because your subscriptions help pay for what we do. We couldn't do it without you. So thank you.
Thank you. I wish we had more time, but we'll have to turn it back over to Kelly Atkinson now for concluding remarks. Thank you so much for your attention today. It's been great. Thank you.
Well, I hope you found today's forum as just inspiring and interesting. And I mean, I feel like I'm always the most ignorant person in this room. I say that all the time. I think today it is especially true. And these gentlemen, I really feel like that was just sharing history, and I so appreciate everything that you guys did. So thank you very much for that. I really think that if you enjoyed today's forum, that you will also enjoy next week's. So next week we are talking, it is the Harrison Smith Legacy Forum and Columbus Downtown Commission Smithy Awards, and that is featuring the Daimler Group CEO Bob White Jr. And again, huge thanks to our online virtual seat patrons, the truly committed CMC supporters who can't be in the room with us, and to the Columbus Dispatch, of course, for supporting today's forum. And also thank you to today's sponsors, the Columbus Partnership and the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation, and for presenting our live stream in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch. All right, and then special appreciation to today's panel, Mike Curtin, Luke Feck, Ben Marrison, Alan Miller, and Ann Fisher. And thank all of you, too, for joining us. We couldn't do it without you, truly, and we look forward to seeing you next week as the Columbus Metropolitan Club presents another community conversation. Thanks.